The train whistle was a scream across the Wyoming plains. Fiona Valentine heard it, not as a promise, but as a warning. She clutched her suitcase to her chest, the worn leather cool against her pounding heart. Inside that case was everything she owned. Everything except the letter that had promised her a new life. The year was 1878, and she was on her way to marry a cattle baron named Harold Whitaker, a man she'd never met. The platform at Promise Creek was little more than a spit of wood in a sea of dust. False front buildings stared back at her like empty skulls. After 3 days on the train, her dress was a mess of wrinkles, and her hair had escaped its pins, but she held her head high. This was it, her one chance. No family to miss her, no life to go back to. Just forward, into the promise of Promise Creek. 10-minute stop, the conductor hollered. Fiona stepped down, her eyes scanning the sparse platform. The letters described him. 50 years old, gray at the temples, a look of prosperity about him. She saw a station master, a couple of cowboys leaning against a wall, and one older gentleman, dressed well, with a sour look on his face. That had to be him. She forced a smile, walked right up to him. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm Fiona Valentine." The man's eyes didn't soften. They narrowed. He looked her up and down like she was livestock he had no intention of buying. "Harold Whitaker sent for you." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. I have his letters right here." Her fingers fumbled at her bag. "That won't be necessary." His voice was cold as a winter grave. "I'm Thaddeus Whitaker, Harold's brother." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "I'm afraid I have difficult news. My brother passed away 3 weeks ago." The world tilted. The hiss of the train steam seemed to roar in her ears. "Dead?" "Influenza," Thaddeus said, his tone clipped. "Took him quickly. I had no idea," she stammered. "I'm so sorry." "Yes, well." Thaddeus cleared his throat, his gaze dismissive. "I wasn't aware he'd sent for a bride. There was no mention of it in his papers." "But we've been corresponding for months," she whispered, the words feeling thin and useless. "Be that as it may," Thaddeus snapped, his patience gone. "There's no place for you here. I've already arranged to sell the ranch. I suggest you get back on that train and return to wherever it is you came from." He turned his back on her. Just like that. Her future, erased in a single cruel conversation. The conductor was calling for final boarding. But Fiona couldn't move. Her feet were rooted to the spot. There was no going back. Her last dollar was spent on this ticket. This one-way ticket to a dead man's town. "Madam, are you boarding?" the conductor asked, his voice impatient. "I can't," she said, the words catching in her throat. The train whistle screamed again, a final mocking farewell. With a lurch and a groan of steel, it began to pull away, dragging her only chance of escape with it down the tracks. She was stranded. The station master shuffled over, his face a road map of pity. "You the mail-order bride for old Whitaker?" he mumbled. "Heard he passed. Terrible shame. Town's been buzzing about that brother of his, selling off everything quick as he can." Fiona could only nod, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. "I have nowhere to go." "Ain't much for a single woman here," the man said, shaking his head. "Boarding house won't take you without a man to vouch, and the saloon, well, that ain't no place for you." He was telling her what she already knew. She was utterly, hopelessly alone. But then one of the cowboys who'd been watching pushed himself off the wall. He was tall, with shoulders that looked like they could carry the weight of the world. His eyes were the color of a clear summer sky, and they were fixed on her with a look of startling kindness. He took off his worn Stetson, revealing a mess of dark blonde hair. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. "Name's Nathaniel Lawson. I couldn't help but overhear." Fiona just stared, speechless. "I know this is mighty forward," he went on, his gaze flicking to the disappearing train and then back to her. "But I heard what happened, and, well, I've got a small spread a few miles out. Nothing fancy, but it's honest land, and I've been looking for a wife." The words hung in the dusty air. Improbable, impossible. "The homestead's no place for a man alone," he said. "You need somewhere to go. I need a partner, a helper. We could help each other." He held out a hand, large and calloused from work. "Take my hand. Take my name. It can be an arrangement. No other expectations." A faint blush colored his tan cheeks. "Just until you can get on your feet," the station master chimed in. "Nat Lawson's a good man, miss. Fought for the Union. Built his place from the dirt up with his own 2 hands. You could do a whole lot worse." Fiona looked from Nat's kind eyes to his outstretched hand. Her mind raced. Destitution or a stranger's proposition. Shame or survival. There wasn't a choice. Not really. "This is very sudden," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am, it is," Nat agreed, his voice gentle. "But sometimes life doesn't give us the luxury of time. I swear I'll respect you. Provide for you. If it don't work out when I can afford it, I'll see you safely on your way." She took a deep breath, the dry Wyoming air burning her lungs. And then she placed her trembling hand in his. "Then I accept, Mr. Lawson." "Nat," he corrected, a small, relieved smile touching his lips. "If we're to be married, you should call me Nat." An hour later, they were standing in front of Judge Miller, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite. He raised an eyebrow at their story but didn't ask any questions he didn't need the answers to. The station master and one of Nat's friends, a fella named Sam Cooper, stood as witnesses. "Do you, Nathaniel James Lawson, take this woman?" "I do," Nat said, his voice firm, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "And do you, Fiona Elizabeth Valentine, take this man?" A tiny pause, a breath, the last moment of her old life. "I do." "Then I pronounce you husband and wife." The judge grunted. "You may kiss the bride." Nat leaned in. His kiss was just a soft brush against her lips. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of promise, of respect. Outside, the world felt different. Sharper, more dangerous. "Congratulations, Mrs. Lawson," the judge said, handing her the marriage certificate. The paper felt flimsy, unreal. Nat sent his friend Sam ahead to his ranch to let the housekeeper know they were coming. Then he led Fiona to a wagon loaded with supplies. "Came to town for flour and salt," he said, helping her onto the hard wooden seat. "Didn't expect to be bringing home a wife." "Nor I to marry a stranger," she replied, the words tasting like dust in her mouth. "No, I reckon not." He climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "I meant what I said, Fiona. No expectations. You'll have your own room. This is a partnership, nothing more." As the wagon rattled out of town, Fiona watched the rolling hills of sage and pine slide by. It was beautiful, but it was a harsh, unforgiving beauty. She had married a man she'd known for less time than it takes to cook a meal, and she was heading to a home she'd never seen. Every bump in the road was a jolt back to reality. What had she done? "Tell me about your ranch," she said, needing to fill the silence, needing to know something about the life she'd just blindly accepted. 160 acres under the Homestead Act," he said. "Small cabin, a barn. Creek runs through it. Started 5 years ago with 10 head of cattle. Got 30 now. He managed it all alone, especially since his young ranch hand had run off to chase California gold. Winter's coming," he said, his expression turning serious. "Too much work for one man. That's why I was thinking of a wife." His answer was practical, logical. It wasn't romantic, but it was honest. And in this strange new world, honesty felt more valuable than romance. He asked about her past, about the parents she'd lost, the dreary life she'd left behind. He listened, his gaze steady and compassionate. He told her he'd lost his own parents in the war, that he'd come west to forget the things he'd seen. There were ghosts in his past, just as there were in hers. Then, as they crested a hill, he pointed. There it is, Lawson Ranch. Below them, nestled in a small valley, was a modest cabin with a curl of smoke rising from its chimney. It wasn't the grand estate she had imagined with Harold Whitaker, but it looked solid. It looked real. A plump, gray-haired woman came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on an apron. This was Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper. She beamed at them, unsurprised. Nat's friend had done his job. Well now, Mr. Lawson, she chirped. You've gone and found yourself a bride. The cabin was one main room, with a big stone fireplace and a ladder leading up to a loft. It was simple, clean, and smelled of wood smoke and baking bread. I've made up the bedroom for you, Mrs. Lawson, the housekeeper said. But where will Mr. Lawson sleep? Fiona asked, her voice quiet. I'll take the loft, Nat answered immediately. There was no argument, no discussion. The arrangement was clear. After Mrs. Holloway left, a thick, awkward silence settled between them. Fiona started clearing the dishes from their simple meal, just to have something to do with her hands. Nat stoked the fire. The space between them felt 100 miles wide. Later, he showed her the ranch, the root cellar, the chicken coop, the barn. He spoke of it with a quiet pride that was touching. This place was his life's work, built with his own 2 hands. As the sun bled across the sky, they walked back to the cabin. He left her alone to unpack, saying he had to check on the stock. Fiona opened her suitcase. Inside, at the very bottom, was the packet of letters. The letters from Harold Whitaker. The ones filled with promises of a comfortable life, of security. Promises that had turned to lies and dust. She looked at the elegant handwriting, the flowery words. Then she looked around the small, sturdy cabin. She walked to the fireplace, and one by one, she fed the letters to the flames. She watched until every single promise was nothing but ash. Almost. Her hand stopped on the very last one. An odd feeling washed over her. A premonition. She folded it carefully and tucked it deep within her Bible. A secret she didn't even know she was keeping yet. When Nat returned, she was sitting by the fire. Everything all right? He asked. Just thinking, she said, about how quickly life can change. He sat across from her. I know this isn't what you planned, Fiona. Come spring, if you want to leave. No, she said, surprising herself with her own firmness. I made a choice. I'll honor it. She looked him straight in the eye. But I want to know why. Why me? Why so fast? He was quiet for a long moment. I told you, I needed a wife, a partner. There are women in town. Not like you, he said, fumbling for the words. You have a strength about you. I saw it on the platform. When that man turned his back on you, you didn't crumble. You stood your ground. He leaned forward. And maybe I just couldn't stand to see another good person broken by this country. His answer felt true, but it also felt incomplete. There was something more, hiding behind his kind eyes, something he wasn't telling her. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Fiona learned to churn butter, collect eggs, mend fences. She was a quick learner, and Nat was a patient teacher. They worked side by side, often in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. Mrs. Holloway would come twice a week, clucking with approval at how well they seemed to be getting on. One evening, Nat brought out a battered chess set. They played by the flickering lamplight, and as they played, they talked. Fiona found he had a quick mind and a dry wit. He told a story about trying to break a wild horse and ending up face down in the mud. For the first time since she'd arrived, Fiona laughed, a real, genuine laugh. And in that moment, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Not love, not yet, but something like it. A fragile tendril of hope. But the ranch held its secrets. One afternoon, while cleaning out the small desk where Nat kept his accounts, she found an old faded photograph. It was of Nat, younger, in his Union uniform. Standing beside him was another man, older, with distinguished gray at his temples and a prosperous look about him. Fiona's blood ran cold. She knew that face. It was the face from the letters. It was Harold Whitaker. The photograph felt like a brand in her hand. Nat had never mentioned knowing Harold Whitaker. He'd acted like a complete stranger to the whole affair. But this picture said he was a liar. Why would he lie? What was his connection to the man she was supposed to marry? The kind stranger who had saved her was suddenly a man with a secret that involved her dead fiancé. And as she stood there, the photograph trembling in her hand, she realized her quiet, simple arrangement might be something else entirely. It might be a trap. Fiona put the photograph back exactly where she found it. She didn't say a word, but everything had changed. The comfortable silences with Nat now felt heavy with things unsaid. His kindness, which had been her salvation, now seemed like a mask. What was he hiding? She started watching him, listening. She paid attention to the way he talked about the land, the way his eyes would sometimes drift towards the ridge that separated his property from the massive Whitaker ranch. There was a longing there, a history. One evening, Mrs. Holloway was telling a story about the town's founding. Of course, the Whitaker place was the first real ranch in this valley, she said. Harold, he built it all. Had a good head for business, he did. Hired the best ranch hands. Young Nat Lawson was his foreman for a time, you know. Best rider he ever had. Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs. Foreman. He hadn't just known Harold Whitaker. He had worked for him. He had lived on that ranch. What happened? Fiona asked, keeping her voice casual. Why did he leave? Mrs. Holloway pursed her lips. Oh, well, that Thaddeus happened. The brother came out from back east about a year ago, started throwing his weight around. He and Nat, they never saw eye to eye. Next thing you know, Nat's gone. Filed his own homestead claim right next door. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture she didn't like. Nat hadn't been a random stranger on the platform. He had been there for a reason. He knew exactly who she was when she stepped off that train. His proposal wasn't an act of charity. It was an act of something else. Possession, strategy. The first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the world in a deceptive purity. A big storm was rolling in. Nat came in from checking the cattle, his shoulders dusted with white, his face grim. A bad one's coming, he announced. We need to batten down. They worked together in the dying light, securing the animals, bringing in firewood. The wind began to howl, and the snow came down in thick, blinding sheets. They were trapped. Sealed inside the small cabin with Nat's lies and Fiona's growing fear. For 3 days the storm raged. They were confined to the cabin and the barn. The world shrunk to the space of a few hundred feet. They played chess. They talked. But now, Fiona heard the double meanings in everything he said. When he spoke of his love for the land, was he talking about his 160 acres, or the sprawling empire just over the ridge? On the 4th day, the storm broke. The sun on the snow was dazzling. Nat said he needed to ride out and check on the cattle in the far pastures. It would take him all day. You'll be all right here alone? He asked. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice betraying none of her turmoil. The moment he was gone, she knew what she had to do. She saddled the gentler of the two horses. She pulled on Nat's oversized coat, and she rode, not towards town, but towards the ridge, towards the Whitaker ranch. The big house was silent, half buried in snow. It looked abandoned. Thaddeus was supposedly in the process of selling it, but no one seemed to be here. Fiona dismounted, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she was looking for. Proof, an answer, anything. The front door was locked, but a window at the back, leading into what must have been the study, had been carelessly left unlatched. It slid open with a groan. She hoisted herself inside. The room was filled with fine furniture, all of it covered in white dust cloths, like a room full of ghosts. On the wall was a massive portrait. A portrait of Harold Whitaker, the man from the photograph. Beneath it, a heavy oak desk. She began to search. She found ledgers, deeds, account books. It was all business. Dry and impersonal. She was about to give up when her fingers brushed against a small, locked metal box in the back of a deep drawer. It was too heavy to be empty. Using a fireplace poker, she pried the lock open. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, was a diary. Harold Whitaker's diary. And a stack of letters. Letters written to him. Her hands shook as she opened the diary. The last entry was dated just 4 weeks ago, the day before he supposedly died of influenza. "Thaddeus is pressing me again. He wants me to sell. He says I am too old, too weak to run this place. He brings men to the house I do not know, rough men with cold eyes. He calls them investors. They look more like vultures. He does not know I have taken steps. The advertisement is placed. If God is good, she will arrive soon. A wife will protect the ranch from him. A family will ensure my legacy. My only fear is that he will find a way to stop her." Fiona's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a man dying of influenza. This was a man living in fear of his own brother. Then she looked at the letters. They were from a woman named Rebecca. She wrote of her love for Harold, her excitement about their upcoming marriage. She was a mail-order bride, just like Fiona. But her letters were dated 6 months ago. She was supposed to have arrived in the spring. What happened to her? A floorboard creaked upstairs. Fiona froze. Someone else was in the house. She quickly shoved the diary and the letters into her coat, scrambled back out the window, and ran for her horse. She didn't look back. She rode as if the devil himself were chasing her, the terrible secrets heavy in her pockets. When she got back to the cabin, Nat was already there. He was standing by the fire, his back to her. He hadn't even taken his coat off. The snow was melting off of it, puddling on the floor. "Where were you, Fiona?" he asked. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. I went for a ride," she stammered. He turned around slowly. His kind blue eyes were gone. In their place was something hard and cold as ice. "Don't lie to me." He took a step towards her. "Where were you?" "I went to the Whitaker ranch," she said, her chin held high. Something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise, recognition. He knew. "You shouldn't have done that. It's not safe." "Why?" she challenged. "What aren't you telling me, Nat? You worked for him. You were his foreman. You lied to me from the very beginning." "I did it to protect you," he said, his voice low and intense. "Protect me from what? From the truth? That Harold didn't die of influenza? That his brother is a monster? I found his diary, Nat." Nat's face went pale. "You have to give that to me, Fiona. You don't understand what you're holding." "I understand that you've been playing some kind of game with me since the moment I arrived," she cried. "What do you want? Is it the land? Did you marry me just to get a claim on the Whitaker ranch?" "No!" he roared, and the force of it silenced her. "I married you to save your life." Before he could say more, there was a sound outside, the thunder of hooves, a lot of them. They looked at each other, their argument forgotten. Nat grabbed his rifle from its pegs on the wall. Fiona peered through the window. It was a group of riders. 3 of them she recognized, the Blackwell brothers, the rough-looking men who had tried to intimidate them before. But they weren't alone. There were 6 of them now. And at their head, sitting on a fine black horse, was Thaddeus Whitaker. "They found you," Nat whispered, his face grim. "He knows you were there." "What do they want?" Fiona asked, her heart pounding. "They want the diary," Nat said, checking the load in his rifle. "And they want to make sure neither of us can ever talk about what's in it." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a terrible resolve. "Bar the door, and stay away from the windows." Thaddeus rode right up to the edge of their small yard. "Lawson!" he bellowed. "I know you're in there, and I know you have the woman. Send her out. She has something that belongs to my family." "She's my wife, Whitaker," Nat shouted back through the closed door. "And what she has, she found on your property. That makes it hers by law." "Don't talk to me about the law, you disgraced foreman," Thaddeus sneered. "You have 5 minutes to send her out with that diary, or we burn this cabin to the ground with both of you inside." Fiona's mind was racing. Disgraced foreman. What did he mean? She looked at the letters she had taken, the ones from the other mail-order bride, Rebecca. She opened one. "Dearest Harold, I am so sorry for what has happened. My heart is broken, but I cannot marry you. I have found love with another. A man I met here in St. Louis. He is a good man, a banker. He will provide for me. I cannot wait for a life on a desolate ranch. Please forgive me. A banker who didn't have to serve in the war." The story Nat had told her. About his own lost love, Rebecca. It was the same name, the same story. It wasn't his story. It was Harold Whitaker's. Nat had loved Rebecca, and she had left him for Harold, the wealthy cattle baron. He hadn't come west to forget the war. He'd come west to follow the woman he loved. He'd taken a job as foreman on his rival's ranch, just to be near her. But she was never coming. She had broken both their hearts. And now, everything made a terrifying kind of sense. Nat's presence at the station, his instant proposal. It wasn't about the land. It was about revenge. Or was it justice? "What are we going to do?" she whispered, looking at Nat's grim face. "We fight," he said simply. The first shot shattered the window next to Fiona's head. She screamed and dropped to the floor. The siege had begun. Gunfire exploded from all sides. The Blackwells were circling the cabin, firing into the windows, splintering the wood of the walls. Nat returned fire, moving from window to window, his shots measured and precise. He was a soldier again. "The back!" he yelled at Fiona. "Watch the back door!" Fiona grabbed the spare rifle, her hands shaking. She remembered the lesson he'd given her. Load, aim, fire. She crawled to the small window at the back of the cabin. She could see one of the Blackwell brothers trying to sneak up with a torch, intending to set the house on fire. She rested the rifle on the windowsill, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. The kick of the gun bruised her shoulder, but the man outside screamed and dropped the torch, clutching a wound in his leg. One down. A fierce pride surged through her, chasing out the fear. This was her home. And this man, whatever his secrets, was her husband. She would not let them take this from her. The battle raged. The air grew thick with gunpowder and smoke. They were hopelessly outnumbered. It was only a matter of time. Then, through a crack in the shutters, Fiona saw something that made her blood run cold. Thaddeus wasn't just sitting on his horse anymore. He was dismounting, and he was carrying a can of something. Kerosene. He wasn't going to wait for the torch. He was going to douse the house himself. "Nat!" she screamed. "Thaddeus is coming to the front porch!" Nat whirled, but just as he did, a bullet ripped through the wall, catching him in the arm. He cried out in pain, dropping his rifle. He was hit. It was all up to her. Fiona didn't hesitate. She threw open the front door and ran out onto the porch, pointing her rifle directly at Thaddeus Whitaker. He froze, not 10 feet away, the kerosene can in his hand. "Get away from our house," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Thaddeus laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "You girl, you think you can stop me? She's not alone." The voice came from the trees. Suddenly, Sam Cooper, Nat's friend, stepped out from behind a pine, a rifle in his hands. And he wasn't alone. The station master was with him. And behind them, more men. Small ranchers, their neighbors. They had heard the gunfire and had come to help. The Blackwell brothers saw they were now outgunned. They looked at Thaddeus, waiting for an order. Thaddeus's face was a mask of fury. His plan was falling apart. He looked at Fiona, his eyes filled with hate. "Give me the diary," he hissed. "It's all I want." "Why?" she demanded. "So no one will ever know you murdered your own brother." A gasp went through the crowd of ranchers. "He was weak," Thaddeus shrieked, his composure finally cracking. "He was going to let this ranch, our family's legacy, go to some mail-order whore. I built this valley. I deserved it. I gave him a choice. Sell to me or die. He chose to die." It was a confession, a full confession, in front of a dozen witnesses. "It's over, Thaddeus," Sam Cooper said, his rifle steady. But Thaddeus was insane with rage. He lunged, not at Fiona, but at the kerosene can, trying to throw it onto the porch. In that split second, Nat, bleeding and staggering, emerged from the cabin. He threw himself at Thaddeus, a desperate tackle that sent them both tumbling into the snow. Thaddeus's gun went off, the shot going wild. The other ranchers swarmed forward, disarming the Blackwells and surrounding the two brothers wrestling in the dirt. It was over. Later, after the new town sheriff had taken Thaddeus and the Blackwells away in chains, Fiona was cleaning and bandaging Nat's arm. The cabin was a wreck, filled with shattered glass and splintered wood. But they were alive. "You knew," she said softly. "You knew Thaddeus killed him." Nat nodded, wincing as she tightened the bandage. "I suspected. Harold was scared. He told me about his plan to get a bride, to protect the ranch from Thaddeus. When I heard he died so suddenly, and that you were on your way, I knew Thaddeus would see you as a threat. I went to the station that day to warn you, to get you away before he could get his hands on you." "But you didn't tell me," she said, her voice full of hurt. "How could I?" he asked, his blue eyes pleading with her to understand. "Tell a woman I've never met that her fiancé is murdered, and she's in terrible danger. Then ask her to trust me, to marry me. You would have run, and Thaddeus would have found you." He reached out with his good hand, touching her cheek. "I couldn't let that happen. Marrying you was the only way I could keep you close, the only way I could protect you." He then told her the whole story. About Rebecca, about loving a woman who chose wealth over him, about following her west, only to find she had jilted both him and Harold. "When I saw you on that platform," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "so alone, but so damn brave. It wasn't about Rebecca anymore. It wasn't about the ranch. It was just about you." The secrets were finally out. Not secrets of betrayal, but of a desperate, complicated attempt to protect her. The next spring, things were different. Harold Whitaker's true will was found, the one Thaddeus had hidden. It stated clearly that if he died before he could marry, his entire estate was to go to the mail-order bride who answered his ad. to Fiona. Overnight, she became one of the wealthiest women in Wyoming. But the massive ranch house stayed empty. She and Nat stayed in their small, sturdy cabin. They used the new resources to buy up the Blackwells' land and give it to the small ranchers who had stood with them. They rebuilt their home, making it stronger. Together. One evening, a year to the day after their wedding, Nat led her to the creek that ran through their property. He knelt down on one knee. He held out a small box. Inside was a simple gold ring. "Fiona Valentine Lawson," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know our beginning was built on secrets and survival, but I want our future to be built on truth. I love you more than this land, more than my own life. Will you be my wife for real this time?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and he kissed her. A real kiss, full of love and promise. They had faced down death and deception, and had come out the other side, not broken, but stronger. A true family, forged in the fires of the Wild West. Their story became a legend in that valley. A story of how a mail-order bride, rejected and alone, brought justice to a town and found a love greater than any fortune. What do you think is the most important part of a partnership? Is it honesty, or is it protection? Sometimes, like in the case of Fiona and Nat, they can be two sides of the same hard-won coin. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales from the wild heart of the world.